Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is the National Girls Collaborative Project National Webinar, From Research to Practice, an up-to-date look at gender equity in STEM. My name is Marissa Garcia. I'm joining on behalf of the National Girls Collaborative Project. Thank you for introducing yourself and responding to the poll here on your screen. I'm going to end that poll in just a few more seconds. And for the time being, I'm going to let you know about some of the logistics of this webinar today. This webinar is, you may have noticed, slightly different from some of the NGCP webinars we've done in the past using Zoom. We are using the Zoom webinar platform, which means that just our speakers today have access to their microphones and videos, and you in the audience have access to the chat as well as a Q&A pod. So you should see the ability to click the Q&A symbol. It's a little symbol with two speech bubbles. And that is a place where you can ask questions throughout the webinar today. You can also like other folks' questions if you want to promote those to the top and you think that they're important that we address later on in the session. So we also have live transcription turned on today. You should see that going at the bottom of your screen. If you click the ... more, there is an option to view the full transcript, which will allow you to see who is speaking when. It associates the name with the speech that they are saying and can be a really helpful feature. So we hope that you enjoy this webinar today. And I am going to turn it over to Karen Peterson.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm so excited to see so many longtime colleagues and friends, and I welcome those of you who are new to the National Girls Collaborative Project National Webinars as well, and happy National Women's History Month. I'm so enthusiastic about this panel and this content, not just because it's National Women's History Month, but also this really speaks to sort of the foundation of NGCP and what we've been doing from the very beginning. So first, I'm going to give you a little background about the National Girls Collaborative Project before we meet our speakers. So Marissa, if you could go to the next slide, please. So the vision of the National Girls Collaborative Project is to bring together organizations committed to encouraging girls to pursue careers in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and computer science. And the photos you see here are just one example of how we facilitate discussion among stakeholders by offering structured networking activities at every NGCP and local collaborative event. And I think many of you who are here have participated in a collaboration networking activity, and you might want to just say something in the chat, because I know that many of you have participated and actually have led collaboration networking as well. During collaboration networking, individuals talk, they match needs and resources, and it highlights ways that organizations can work together to impact the youth they are serving. We all know that there's a diversity of high quality resources available, and many of you have little time to search for strategies and content to improve your program. Can we go to the next slide, please, Marissa? So NGCP helps you address these needs via our website, our newsletters, online databases, social media, and webinars just like this one. This webinar is particularly specific to our mission. And from the beginning, NGCP has worked to connect research to practice and to update the field as we see new research and thought leaders. We distribute these resources in an accessible format via Train the Trainer programs, partnerships, and online platforms. When programs are stronger and more sustainable, girls are better served. And finally, we use the leverage of a network and a collaboration of girls serving STEM programs and champions to create the tipping point for gender equity in STEM. Next slide, please. The National Girls Collaborative Project engages in a number of activities virtually and nationally and locally through state-based collaborative leadership teams. NGCP partners with organizations to scale and deliver content such as the Leap into Science National Network in partnership with the Franklin Institute, and Crypto Club in partnership with the University of Chicago, both funded by the National Science Foundation, serving hundreds of educators via statewide networks. NGCP manages the Connectory, which is the largest national database of STEM opportunities. The Connectory also provides a way for program providers to connect and collaborate with each other. FabFems is an international database of female role models for many STEM fields. They are passionate about the work that they do, and they are ready to connect with programs to spark girls' interests. NGCP is working with Lyda Hill Philanthropies and has launched the If Then Collection, a digital library housing photos, videos, and other media of women in STEM fields. Locally, state collaborative leadership teams offer educators and researchers professional development. They offer mini grants for innovative projects when funding is available, and they distribute their own regular newsletters spotlighting local resources. Next slide, please. The National Girls Collaborative Project has been partially funded by the National Science Foundation since 2002. We began as the Northwest Girls Collaborative Project focused on Washington and Oregon. And then as we presented our collaboration model to others, we were invited to expand across the United States. And while NGCP programs and partners are located in every state, we have collaborative leadership teams in 41 states. And today we facilitate collaboration between more than 42,000 organizations serving 20 million girls and 12 million boys as well, since many of the organizations serving girls are also serving boys with engaging STEM curriculum and activities. Okay, back to you, Marissa.
Thank you, Karen. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our fantastic group of speakers today. We have Brenda Bridge, who is a senior research scientist with the National Girls Collaborative Project. Brenda believes in the potential of research to transform practice and works to make research accessible to a broad audience of educators and other professionals invested in equity in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Brenda has served as a co-principal investigator for multiple NSF-funded projects focused on equity in STEM, and is the co-author of the publication SciGirl Strategies: How to Engage Girls in STEM. We're also joined today by Gabriela A. González. She is the Deputy Director and Operations Manager of the Intel Foundation, informing K-12 science, technology, engineering, and math, and women and girls STEM strategies. Ms. González engages and collaborates with multiple stakeholders across Intel, as well as external partners in academia, government, industry, and nonprofit agencies to drive and influence meaningful STEM education outcomes. Throughout her career, Ms. González held several engineering roles at Intel, transferring the latest microprocessor technology from development to high volume manufacturing and managing equipment capacity, labor, and operational productivity. Ms. González began her professional career at Xerox Corporation, where she held various manufacturing, engineering, and management leadership positions. In 2018, Ms. González was appointed as the chair of the National Science Foundation STEM Education Panel. She is an active member of her professional, social, and cultural communities as a leader and role model, driving impact for underrepresented students and professionals in STEM around the globe. In addition to her work with Intel, Gabriela will be defending her dissertation this spring, examining STEM nonprofits and their role supporting girls' participation. We also are joined today by Dr. Zara Hazari, who is a professor in the Department of Teaching and Learning and the STEM Transformation Institute at Florida International University, as well as an affiliate faculty member in the Department of Physics at Florida International University. She holds a BS in Physics and Mathematics, an MS in Physics, and a Ph.D. in Science Education, Curriculum, Teaching, and Learning. Dr. Hazari's doctoral and postdoctoral work were at the University of Toronto and the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. Dr. Hazari's research focuses on reforming physics learning environments in an effort to disrupt inequitable systems and improve critical outcomes for underrepresented groups in physics, especially women. In particular, her work centers on physics identity and STEM identity development. Identity frameworks have provided critical insight on disrupting inequitable and hegemonic systems to address historic issues of participation and persistence. This work has led to her being elected a Fellow of the American Physical Society, earned her a National Science Foundation Career Award, and been featured in US News and World Report, Washington Monthly, Science Magazine, Scientific America, Live Science, Science for the People, and APS News. Dr. Hazari has served on several editorial boards, APS's Committee for the Status of Women in Physics, and AAPT's Committee on Women in Physics. And finally, we are also joined today by Dr. LaShonda Lindsay, who is a research scientist at Wellesley Centers for Women and the project director of Black Girls Create. Over the past decade, Dr. Lindsay's research has created a platform that sheds a light on the social determinants, racial injustices, and cultural biases that burden the progression and viability of Black girls and women. She has mentored Black girls, implemented sustainable programs and initiatives for Black girls, and most recently founded Black Girls Matter, a social media campaign. Prior to joining Wellesley's Centers for Women, Lindsay served as the interim chairperson and an associate professor of education at Payne College in Augusta, Georgia. Dr. Lindsay also uses her passion and creativity to enhance the well-being of girls and women by designing and creating her own line of jewelry and accessories, Ananse Design Essentials, LLC. This entrepreneurial endeavor and decade of research on, about, and for Black girls has promoted the creation of a new initiative, Black Girls Create. Black Girls Create is an informal STEM learning program that integrates fashion design and engineering to increase Black girls' interest and value in STEM education and careers. We are so thrilled to have all of these fantastic women here presenting and sharing their insights with us today. And without further ado, I am going to turn it over. Each of our speakers will have about 5 minutes to present about their work, followed by a prepared Q&A, and then finally answering your questions from the audience. So I'm going to turn it over to Brenda, who will start her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Marissa. Thank you everyone for being here. I am very excited to be a part of this amazing panel of women and talk about one of my favorite topics. And we appreciate you all spending this time with us. It's a great group, and I appreciate the comments that are already in the chat, and we encourage you to continue those. So I have been fortunate to be a part of the National Girls Collaborative Project since almost the beginning. In fact, when Karen mentioned that it started as the Pacific Northwest Girls Collaborative Project, that is when I started being involved. And my work with NGCP has focused on making research accessible to a broad group of educators, the educators that NGCP serves. The particular focus on those working in informal learning environments. So after school programs, summer camps, community-based organizations, science museum, but also formal educators as well. So my work is really focused on the practice part of this webinar. I read and I learn from colleagues such as those on this panel about the great research they're doing, and I bring it ideally in helpful ways to the educators that we serve. The work that I would like to highlight quickly for this webinar is from a project that I was involved with SciGirls. And if you're not familiar with SciGirls, they're a national initiative also focused on increasing gender equity in STEM, based at Twin Cities Public Television in Minnesota. And I had the great opportunity to be a part of a team of researchers and educators funded by the National Science Foundation to do a deep dive into the current research on engaging girls in STEM. And so you'll see in the blue ovals on my slide, we identified through the review 6 core strategies that were shown to positively impact girls' interest and confidence in STEM, positive attitudes towards STEM, and also strategies that facilitated STEM identity development, help girls identify with STEM, feel that STEM is for them. So just quickly, I'll read through them. relevance, so making STEM relevant, personally relevant for girls, exposing girls to diverse role models, identifying and addressing stereotypes. These stereotypes are not just about who does STEM, but also about STEM itself, helping girls to embrace struggle, which is really connected to developing a growth mindset, showing how STEM can be collaborative and social, and also really providing opportunities for girls to use authentic STEM practices in their work. And I think Kata put in the chat a couple links to this work if you want to learn more. There's a journal article that our team put together, and then there's also the Sci Girls Strategies guide, which is a very practice-oriented guide that discusses the issues of gender equity in STEM, and it really highlights these 6 strategies and provides concrete practical tips for implementing them in your work. So then just to touch on what inspires me to do this work, part of what inspires me to be in this field is my own experience in STEM, which I think is not an unusual story. But I really was one of those girls, one of those young women who really liked math and science and wasn't necessarily supported or encouraged in that direction. So you'll see there's a picture on the bottom right-hand side of my slide, which is actually from an episode of Sci Girls from a season called Latino Sci Girls that I was very honored to be a part of. And these girls are part of an episode that took place at NASA. And it really exemplifies for me what I hope for girls and young women, which is really to be able to explore STEM, to develop STEM skills, to be excited about STEM, and to know that you're capable in STEM. STEM is for you. And the way that I feel my work is able to impact girls is through educators. And so you'll see on the top left-hand side of my slide, a picture that I think may have been in one of Karen's slides as well. And it's a group of National Girls Collaborative Project educators and partners who we brought together for a professional development event, pre-COVID, of course, to really build their capacity and to collaboratively work together to share research and practice to effectively serve girls in STEM. So that is, I think, what I wanted to share with you today. I just want to emphasize the importance of the cycle between research and practice also, research also listening to practice, as well as practice being informed by research. And I look forward to our discussion, and I'm very happy to turn over the presentation to Gabriela.
Thank you, Brenda. Hello, everyone. So my first challenge is, how do I compress over 30 years of practice and 10 years of academic exploration into 5 minutes? So we'll do our best. Again, I'm very happy to share this presentation with you all today. I'm kind of caught in the middle between practice and research. And, as opposed to the title of this webinar, my background really started in the practice. I've had over 30 years of experience in outreach programs, volunteering and designing programming for STEM programming to really tackle sort of the underrepresentation in engineering specifically. So I've spent the vast majority of my career outside of my work as an engineer, trying to figure out why is it, despite over 50 years of investments in girls to try to close the gap, the gender gap in STEM. And again, I'm very focused in engineering, not all of STEM. We have not been able to do that. So when we look at the National Science Foundation statistics for undergraduate degrees earned by women over the past 25 plus years, we show a very flat line. And in fact, for computer science, there was even a slight decline over the past 30 or 25 years. So given that data, it really sparked my curiosity as a practitioner of engineering, but more so as a researcher. So I decided to go back to school and really try to understand some of the academic, perspectives. So I've spent the majority of my career outside of my daily job, working with parents and educators and students to try to understand how to not only change along the gender axis, but overall representation of girls of color and girls from underserved communities in the engineering field. So I've come up with different models over the past 15 years or so. I started a program locally here in Arizona working with community colleges called Hermanas Diseña tu Futuro, which focuses on girls from middle schools and high schools who would not otherwise ever consider a STEM education or career. So again, these are girls who may choose not to engage in science courses or math, who may have challenges at home or at school that they have to overcome, or they may be feeling like they may need to drop out of school. So that's where we started, or I started kind of, thinking about different models to engage these particular girls, what I call my 99% opportunity, the majority of the girls who do not demonstrate either an academic interest or personal interest in these fields. Because of my career changes at Intel, I now found myself in a position where I could help also design an outreach model to engage others to help us in this journey. And so this initiative inside of Intel, we call the She Will Connect initiative. And again, one of the components I felt that was missing in my initial model was the families and the communities that engage with girls in an everyday basis. And of course, from that, this, as of last year, amplified and scaled into a movement called the Million Girls Moonshot, where we're now collaborating with other organizations, private industry, public and private industry as well, to help increase the reach and touch for girls and communities to encourage them to participate in STEM education and careers. So having said that, as I mentioned and Marissa alluded to, I will be defending my dissertation this spring. And my research was really based on three main pillars around intersectionality, collective impact, and accountability. And I believe these are key to how we can transform the way we approach STEM education, outreach, and engagement. You can see in the slide some of the questions, some of my research questions, and even though I haven't defended my dissertation as of yet, I can share a couple of early findings, including changing and adapting programming to be more intersectional in nature and culturally responsive. Also around collective impact, again, found that most of the time people think of collective impact as a set of partnerships. And so they interchangeably use those terms when collective impact is really hard to do. And it also produces, I think, a synergized outcome versus just the addition of different partnerships. And then, of course, accountability. Again, we've invested, decades and billions of dollars into trying to make sense of how to engage girls better. And I find that accountability is one of those key aspects that works at the organizational level for the most part. But when it comes to longitudinal accountability or accountability in general, it's hard to trace the impact and the result back to that experience that made a difference for girls. So that is sort of a summary of my research, but I'll be happy to share and answer any questions during the discussion.
Thank you, Gabriela. And we are going to turn it over to Zara.
Thank you, Gabriela. Thank you, Marissa. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much to NGCP and to all of you for listening. And my name is Zara Hazari, and I just was going to share a little bit about the design principles of how we think about the work that we are doing, mostly in physics education, on physics identity development. But I think many of the lessons we draw from the broader STEM literature and STEM education literature and identity literature and gender literature. So I think maybe some of this will resonate with the audience here. But just to begin, most of my work focused on disciplinary identity development. So Marissa, if you want to further it, I can put up a definition of how we conceptualize what disciplinary identity is. It's how students see themselves in relation to a discipline based upon their perceptions of the discipline and experiences with the discipline. And disciplinary identity can have like a performative aspect as well as a narrated aspect that students describe who they are, but they also perform who they are to others in the world around them. So we look at it in multiple different ways. And we start our work with the assumption, and in particular, we're looking at physics. So the first decade of my work was really about understanding what is the issue for young women in physics. Gabriela, Brenda pointed out some of the stats, and especially Gabriela pointed out some of the stats that we haven't seen a great increase in the representation of women in physics at the bachelor's degree level. And many, many initiatives have been tried. And so my early question in the first decade of this work was, why haven't all these initiatives worked, right? And so I came at it a little bit differently from a research perspective first, and now I'm heavily in the practice perspective. That's of course tied to research as well. And someone in the chat pointed that out as being really important, that loop that we have to keep cycling between research and practice. And so we start with the premise, Marissa, can you further it? That physics is an inherently inequitable discipline. That what it means to do physics, the knowledge, the practices are all inequitable in the sense that they were all defined by primarily one group over the last 2,000 years, right? Going back to the ancient Greeks from Aristotle, right? There is not many voices of people of color or women that constitute the epistemology of what it means to do physics and what is valued in physics, as well as what are the valued practices in physics. So we begin with the assumption that physics is inequitable, it is hegemonic, it is androcentric, and young women are exposed to interactions with this hegemonic discipline. So if you want to further it, Marissa, I love the animations because it helps me tell the story a little bit better. So a young woman is interacting with this discipline that has been defined over the last 2,000 years for her, and she interacts with it in the formal and the informal spaces, right? So she might watch The Big Bang Theory and internalize messages about what it means to be a physicist, what it means to do physics. She might take a physics class which reinforce those hegemonic kind of principles of what it means to do physics. And she may come to the conclusion based on those interactions with the discipline that, go ahead, Marissa, that I'm not a physics person, that this is not for me, this is not who I am, right? Even though those things don't really represent maybe the pursuit of that science, right? And they're very narrow in their construction. So what we do in our projects, particularly Step Up for Women, which is one of our big initiatives that we now have 1,300 high school physics teachers that are part of our network, is that we try to disrupt inequitable and narrow constructions of what it means to do physics. So we're not trying to fit her into the box of physics, which is, I think, what a lot of the very old initiatives used to do. They used to just target women and say, okay, let's get them interested in the same old physics, right? Or in the same old practices, rather than thinking, how do we disrupt the discipline to then enable their voices to help help define what it means to do physics and be a physicist. So now when we disrupt these inequitable and narrow constructions of what it means to do physics, now she thinks, go ahead, Marissa, her physics identity can be influenced. So her interest in physics maybe can increase, her feelings of competence, her feelings of being recognized as a physics person, and her sense of belonging to the field might improve if we're creating these disruptions for her, both in the formal and the informal spaces. And then she might begin to think, Marissa, one more, maybe I am a physics person. Right. So that's really the logic behind a lot of our work, is creating these disruptions. Two strategies that we have used and we are beginning to use a great deal build on what Gabriela was saying about the countermeasures. So we really draw on counter narratives or counter storytelling. So to raise the voices of women of color and of people of color and of women in general on their stories of what it means to do physics for them, and not the narrow constructions, not the ones who fit into that box, but the ones who busted out of that box and thought of physics beyond the boundaries of what was done in the past. So we disrupt with counter narratives and counter storytelling, and also by creating counter spaces. And I think NGCP, Sci Girls, all of these initiatives that Brenda is talking about, and these best prints and these practices, these are disruptions, right? These are the kinds of disruptions we're creating in order to enable the identity development of these young women in these spaces and to elevate their voices to define the field, not just fit into the field. Okay, and with that, I'm going to pass it on to LaShonda.
Good afternoon. I'm LaShonda Lindsay from Wellesley Centers for Women. And the project that I'm going to talk about is called Black Girls Create, which is a culturally responsive maker program. And how I define culturally responsive making is it's about how do you take the world of maker culture and make it applicable and make it available to an underrepresented population in STEM, particularly Black girls. So in my particular project, this project kind of stemmed or developed from my research as an educational psychologist, looking at the underrepresentation of Black women in STEM fields and looking at some of the factors that affect their underrepresentation. And what I found is that young Black college women identify factors, and they said they didn't necessarily, they were disencouraged to enter into STEM fields, but they weren't encouraged either. And so, and when I inquired about their pre-college experiences, many of them did not have any pre-college experiences in STEM. And those who did, it was more of the traditional involvement in STEM. And for girls who were already not interested in STEM, it didn't appeal to them, so they didn't participate. And so I've taken that research and my own identity as a self-taught maker, mainly with 3D printing and laser cutting, to create this project called Black Girls Create. And so through this particular project, it's about how do I encourage or help girls to become interested in making, right? And what does that look like for them? And so through this particular approach, I kind of use about 3 or 4 prong approach. I use social history, like their history as young Black women. And I pair that or let them select Black women in STEM fields to do research about. Because research shows that we need not only role models in our life, but historical information that connects us to a field. And so while they're learning or they're doing their own research about whatever Black woman that they choose for, they also learn how to digitally fabricate cultural artifacts. As you see in the picture here, this is one of my former students. She's standing at the laser cutter. So they learn 2D design, 3D design, and then how to digitally fabricate things like earrings, necklaces, bracelets, keychains, all whatever they come up with. But the key part of it is not just to like create a soccer ball, right? Or a picture of Beyonce, because a lot of girls like Beyonce. It's about getting them to connect that what they're learning about fabrication to the historical, I call it her STEM figures, like and creating this artifact. So for example, if Gabriela was a part of my program, I'm just gonna pick on you for a second, and I said, hey, Dr. Lindsay, I want to learn about Mae Jemison. And you discover that Mae Jemison is the first Black female astronaut. And so you start to do research about Mae Jemison. And while you're learning about, we use open source programs like Inkscape and GIMP and Tinkercad. So as you're learning how to navigate through this software, you learn that Mae Jemison was the first Black female astronaut. And you say, hey, I might want to create a pair of rocket earrings. And that way you're able to connect the maker skills to something greater. And then it becomes a conversation piece and a cultural artifact at the same time. And so what I found in my research is that girls are really excited about making and learning how to make things. And that this particular approach gets them to thinking about STEM in a different way. It gets them to thinking about, oh, what women came before me, in terms of one of my former participants. She did her research and she, who did she do? She did Gladys West. Gladys West helped to create the GPS system. And so she created like a wooden GPS make out of a keychain or some earrings. And another student studied Shirley Jackson. They studied they chose the different women that they wanted to study. And then they were able to apply those maker skills, which includes computational thinking, which includes 2D design, 3D design, mathematics, all these different types of skills that are taught in schools in a very formalized way that has no often has no application to life. And so what I found is that girls were really excited and they were more inclined to want to learn more about fabrication and how to become what does it mean to become an engineer. And they even noticed some of the flaws within the maker tools that we were using in terms of, how to make different things. And another significant part of my work showed that at the end, their parents come into and they demonstrate their skills, and they have to teach their parents like to make one thing. And that was really interesting because it wasn't just about them knowing how to do it, but it was also about them being able to articulate what the steps that they were taking and teach it to another person. And so from this kind of work, I'm looking for additional funding to strengthen the work and expose the work. But with the kind of things that are going on with COVID, it's kind of been difficult to be in maker labs and spaces, but it's just a really exciting program and the ways in which girls, you can expose girls to STEM and not give them like, oh, we just want to give them access to STEM. Well, you can give them access in the same way, but they're still not going to be interested because it has no cultural connection or real life significance. So with Black Girls Create, we try to do all of those different things and create these opportunities for them.
Thank you so much. We have learned so much in these last 20 minutes. I'm so excited by all that you have already shared with us. I want to ask a question, and you don't all have to answer this question, but whoever would like to. And I really want to focus on the positive because we've all been working on this for some time. We have this strong community that's watching this webinar and attending along with us. But maybe name a few ways that you've seen significant progress since you've been doing this work. I'd just like to hear from a few of you, some bright spot, significant progress that has occurred. Whoever would like to speak to that question.
I'll start if you don't mind. I'm just so in awe of all the panelists. Again, just, I'm just nodding my head to everything that they've said, especially, with Zara's comments about, breaking out of those traditional and, hegemonic spaces, and all other adjectives that she used. It's really, again, I always say, our girls are not broken. We don't need to fix our girls. We need to fix the systems and the institutions. So I think what I found, and again, that kind of thing that just went off in my head when you engage with girls, as I'm sure Dr. Lindsay would attest to, and if I may call you LaShonda, it once you spark that interest in a girl and make it relevant for them, you got them. They will learn what they need in order to make that artifact, or in order to make that technology, or in order to come up with a solution. But you got to win their hearts and minds first. You can't just come at them with saying, there's something wrong with you, we need to fix you and get you to like math and science. So again, for me, watching girls go through that transformation in the time of half a day to a day, and then going back to their schools, not only excited about the possibilities, feeling like they matter and like they are valued, because everyone else around them has told them that they don't matter and they can never amount to anything because their grades are not there, or because their family situation is not there. To me, that is it, right? It's these girls that go back to their schools and then engage academically where they hadn't before, engage with their friends to start STEM clubs when nobody asked them to. That to me is the transformation we're looking for, particularly for girls from underserved communities, right? For the most part, they've been tossed aside as not even having the capacity or the potential to contribute to innovation and technology. So that to me, is seeing that impact in the lives of real life girls who would not otherwise ever consider belonging to these fields.
That's very inspiring. Would anybody else like to answer the question, Brenda?
I'd like to just jump on that one.
Great.
And I appreciate Gabriela's comments. And I think it's something we need to say over and over again, is that we know the problem is not the girls and the women, right? And I think Zara also did a great job of pointing that out. And I think it's discouraging sometimes when we do look at some of those numbers, right? Especially computer science, engineering, and physics at higher ed and the workforce level. But from a K-12 perspective, being a part of the National Girls Collaborative Project for almost 20 years, I think we've seen a lot of progress. I think we know a lot more than we did even 20 years ago. I think we have a lot of people who are focused on this effort. We have a lot of programs happening. And I think that as we see the progress continue, it's hard to separate it from the numbers and the statistics conversation, but I also think that we're going to see we have to see the fields change too, right? And I think when we see some of these young women going into these fields, it's going to look different. They're going to be doing things like LaShonda is talking about. They might not go to a traditional route. They're going to do something new and different. So I think we have to kind of just balance, what we're working toward. And we know that some of the information isn't encouraging with what really the progress that we are making. So.
Thanks, Brenda. Would any other panelists like to comment on that?
I would comment, because a lot of times, and even with my approach, when I kind of entered with this project, because I'm a jewelry maker, I figured that I just assumed that the girls would want to make jewelry as well. And they was like, no, we don't want to make jewelry. We want to do something else. And giving them that freedom to kind of make choices and kind of let go of what we want and what we think the project and the program should look like. And I'm like, fine, you know, just it has to just meet some type of criteria. You have to use at least one maker tool. You have to digitally design it yourself. So just like pulling back and not putting what we want onto the young people and to girls and what they can achieve is very critical, because sometimes when you create a curriculum and you work so hard on it and you have exactly how you want it to look, and you go or you're working with the girls and they're saying, well, that's good, but I think I want to do this. Having those choices is important, and valuing their voice, and they will tell you what they need if they feel like it's the emotionally safe environment where they can take those types of academic risks. So for me, that's what I've learned in this work is, yes, I could come in with my template and with everything, but that flexibility and being able to say, okay, well, you know what, everybody doesn't have to make earrings because that's what I love. Just make something using the tools and the information. And the second thing I would say is involving parents in the process, right? Because we can teach, it's in my other life, I'm a therapist. It's like when you're doing therapy and you don't address the whole family, what are you doing therapy with a child for, right? It's not going to really work. So you have to include the family in the process in some way so they can help you to disrupt, and they can encourage the girls to do and continue the field and ask for help when it's needed. So I found that to be very helpful, because I've been asked to do like, and I was like, I guess I could, but my focus is for girls. So thinking about ways in which we can incorporate families into these opportunities as well, because I found that the parents want to learn how to make things just as well.
Thank you. And we know family engagement is so important, right? And I see in the chat, people are talking about youth voice as well. I want to ask one more question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Marissa, because we have some great Q&A in there as well. And Brenda already hinted at the fact that next year it'll be NGCP's 20th anniversary. Hard to believe that 20 years has gone by. We've been doing this work, but I'd like to hear from any of the panelists. If you can imagine the world 20 years from now, what changes do you anticipate for women and girls in STEM?
Some of the changes I think that I anticipate is more flexibility in what the workforce in general would look like, and women's contribution to that. Opening like what the, I guess one thing that I've learned during this kind of this time, that period that we in, we can work from anywhere. And having that awareness that we can use our spaces, and women and girls don't have to necessarily separate from their obligations, that they can do all of the things, even though they shouldn't do all of the things, that they can do it in a much more flexible way, as opposed to just like having to go into the office, having to do all of these different things. So having more flexibility in what the workforce looks like is going to change in the broader sense, and especially in STEM as well.
I think for me, in 20 years, if we can get to a space where women of all backgrounds, and men for that matter, don't have to think twice about becoming an engineer or scientist, because it's so ubiquitous, and it's because it's so embracing of all people, and it's transparent in what it does. You know, people know what becoming a technologist, engineer, scientist means. If we can get to that, I mean, to this with the same sort of visualization that we have today for nurses and doctors and lawyers and firemen and women and police, I would be happy if we can even reach that point in 20 years. but I'm skeptic. I think we have a lot of work to do, but that would be kind of a nice place to get to.
I can jump in on Gabriela there. So, I mean, I'm also a skeptic because, you know, the history of science is long, and disrupting those structures is not easy because structures are built to reproduce themselves. But I do see a lot of hope because we are having conversations now that we didn't have 10 years ago. And there's more reflection on the system and the biases within the system. And I think the more young women and educators become aware of these systemic issues, the more they can do at their local level. They can disrupt at their local levels, but they can also recognize when that structure is imposing on them, right? So when something happens, rather than internalize it, a young woman who's reflective about the system and has now begun to think, and this is why I think it's an important part of our interventions to actually have them reflect on systemic bias and implicit bias and, you know, these structures that have been created over thousands of years that now they're trying to take part in, so that they don't reach like the physics program, the engineering program, computer science program, and say, this is not what I did in that informal science club, that maker space that really empowered me. There's people here that are imposing things on me, that are making me feel lesser. And so they have to be able to recognize that those structures are there so that they can externalize it and they can combat against it together, lock arms to combat against it together. So I see more of that. And I think 20 years from now, people will be even more reflective of the microaggression, reflective of the way the structure is imposing on them to push back against it. So I guess that's my feeling of hope. In terms of educators, I think we have more tempered radicals growing. Not radicals with a temper, but people who are disrupting within their own classrooms in their small ways. And as more people disrupt in small ways within their classroom, within the science museum exhibits, within science centers, within clubs and camps and informal spaces, within home environments too, and engaging with those communities, as more of those disruptions are done, I think it'll push the needle. Are we going to be able to change the structures? No, not in 20 years, I don't think, but we will be able to create more disruptions.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. This has been so valuable. And we have some great other questions in the Q&A and some comments. So Marissa, I think you're going to work through those now, right? Take it away.
Sure.
Great.
Yes, thank you. And I will invite all of our speakers to take a peek in that Q&A pod, because there are some questions that you may be able to more easily answer by typing in a link to some additional resources or things like that. But we'll start with this top question here from Adrian, who is asking, is there any research planned to study possible increase in STEM gap due to the pandemic impact on education? So has anyone heard of anything, or is anyone working on anything that is taking a look at how the pandemic has impacted STEM?
I'm not sure about specific research being planned, but I think what would be really interesting, we've had a lot of conversations with programs over this time, and Karen and I were just talking about this, and a lot of programs are also talking about not just some negative consequences, but maybe also some positive outcomes of being able to reach more youth, or having to adapt their programs in a way that make them more equitable and inclusive. So although I don't know of anything in particular, I'm sure it will happen, and I'd be really interested in seeing it to address both sides of the issue.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, we'll have to see what the future will hold. I'm sure that there are many, many folks who are, jumping on that as we speak here on this webinar today. We have a question for Gabriela about your research and the STEM inertia and status quo persistence framework chart you included on that slide. It was very interesting. Is there a way that folks can learn more and read further about the work that you're doing?
Not on my research yet, because my dissertation has not yet been published. But if you can provide my contact information, anyone who asks, I'll be happy to answer any questions. You may also please reach out to me via LinkedIn. That's another way to reach out to me with specifics. But on the Million Girls Moonshot, I do believe Karen posted the link there in the chat, milliongirlsmoonshot.org. And you can find more information. And as far as She Will Connect, you can go to, or just Google Untitled She Will Connect, and there'll be some websites there.
Thank you. All right, let me take a look here. We have a question. What is your advice in helping young women from low-income backgrounds in the period between high school and college to see STEM college careers or trades as viable options, particularly in the Latino community? This comment or questioner commenter has personally had to combat these thoughts as a first-gen Latino student themselves. STEM careers are often seen as options for rich people. So how do you help young people in that in-between period between high school and college really see the opportunities that STEM and the trades could provide them?
Oh, I guess as a Latina from a low-income background myself, it's hard for me to answer this from a personal experience, because my journey was a little bit different. I didn't know what I was signing up when I became an engineer. But the way that I was sold engineering is you can make a decent salary being an engineer, and that will take me out of poverty. That was the answer for me. So a lot of people from the Latino community, they're really looking for a respectful career. They're looking for a way out of poverty. A way to help their family was a big selling point for me. We're not in it for ourselves in as much as we are in it for our families and being able to help our families. So I think that when I talk to young girls, especially from low-income backgrounds, regardless of their ethnicity or race, is they want a way out of poverty. They want a way out of living paycheck to paycheck and having to depend on government programs to survive. And so I think engineering is one of those ways to help generate a larger income than most professions with similar number of years invested in school. So that would be my advice, is to find out what drives them. And for me, again, getting out of poverty was very important. And so engineering, as hard, and I didn't know what engineering was when I signed up, just knowing that I would get to a point where I could help myself and my family and lift our family out of poverty was incentive enough.
Thank you. We have, we're coming close to the end of time, but I think I'm going to try and squeeze in one more question from the audience before we do our closing remarks. This question is coming from Peter, asking, do you see a role for career and technical education, CTE, as an opportunity to increase and engage girls in STEM? If so, what steps would you recommend to school boards and school administrators to help make those connections?
Yes, I feel like that it's a critical CTE has a critical role in exposure and providing girls with an opportunity to be exposed, and all students to be exposed to different careers. And what I've seen in the past, I don't know if CTE has changed, is it focused on like trades, which is good because we still need a lot of people to engage in different things, but just kind of widen the opportunities, right? And really having this key assessments of allowing girls to kind of think about what they are good at and what they enjoy doing, and then using CTE as an opportunity to expose them to that information and making it a part of the formal educational process, where they can actually do apprenticeships or things like that, as opposed to instead of just doing a regular elective in high school. So just being innovative, the way in which we kind of provide them with opportunities.
Thank you so much. Well, I am going to just quickly share my screen as I thank our fantastic group of speakers today. I personally have learned so much from listening to all of you present and respond to these questions, and it has been an incredibly valuable experience for me, and I think it has for our audience as well. I did want to close us out with just recommending that folks check out our next National Girls Collaborative Project event, which is a Twitter chat. So if you follow the hashtag Women Talk STEM, that will be occurring on March 18th. And this Twitter chat is all about sparking a future. It is in partnership with the Million Girls Moonshot and will feature inspirational if-then ambassadors, who are female ambassadors from STEM, sharing how their work impacts the world, challenges they overcame, and advice they'd give their 10-year-old selves. So that will be a fun way to get some more perspectives on topics like these, and we hope you join us for that Twitter chat. That's all we have for today. We also ask, as always, that you please fill out a post-webinar survey, which Kata has put in the chat and should open as we close out this webinar today. That just helps us improve our webinars for the future and bring great content like this to all of you. So thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.